have an email from Aaron. This is a really good story. I listened to your story today about people being abducted in Canada, and I have growing concerns about how it relates to my son, as you will hear from what I'm about to tell you. I think these Bigfoot critters have an unhealthy attraction to him. We lived in West Virginia when all of this began, and my son was only 4 years old at the time. His name is Andy. It was during December of 2020, and Andy came out of his room with his boots and his coat on. I asked him where he was going, and he told me that a boy named Jimmy was outside and wanted to play. I was shocked that Andy would even think that we would let him out after dark, but like a great dad, I told him to get his ass back in bed. The next morning was a Saturday, and I was off work from Home Depot, sitting at the kitchen table enjoying a cup of coffee before I started my chores. Andy came out of his room, which is when I asked him to tell me more about this Jimmy character. He went into this story where he said Jimmy comes to his window each night, knocks on the glass to wake him up, and I asked where Jimmy lived and who his parents were and all the pertinent information required of a parent trolling his kid's social life. Andy told me that he didn't really know. My curiosity was now leaning toward Andy having an imaginary friend, until I asked him to describe what his buddy looked like. "Well, he's big and he's black," Andy muttered. That was the only description he ever gave us, and we really didn't know what to say about it or even to believe him, as he was only 4 years old. We live back in the country, and most people wouldn't come near these homes for fear of being shot or eaten by a dog. Well, one morning, Andy came out of his room with a fist-sized piece of quartz, and he asked if his beauty rock would be worth anything. He said Jimmy had given it to him in the night after Andy had swapped him a kazoo. The next morning, Andy was excited to tell us that he had traded Jimmy an apple for a neat bracelet that was made out of vines. At that point, the situation between our 4-year-old and his mysterious friend was getting out of hand. For all we knew, this Jimmy was a child predator. I decided that I was going to sit in my truck all night and watch Andy's windows, but by morning nothing had happened. Andy didn't know that I had been camped out in my truck and waiting for Jimmy to make his appearance. He had left oranges in the windowsill that were still there. I told my wife that she and Andy would have a camp out in the living room that night where they could make a tent from the blankets and keep themselves entertained by toasting marshmallows on the stove. I loaded up my 870 with buckshot and deer slugs. After placing an apple on the window ledge and making the bed look like Andy was under the covers and sound asleep, I dimmed the lights and I hid inside the closet with the door cracked open just enough to see from the window to the bed. It had been several hours until almost midnight when I heard the window quietly slide open. I saw 2 black hands reach in and grab the apple. I sat there patiently like you would turkey hunting in the woods, waiting for that gobbler to pop his head around an old oak tree, when you know you've got the opportunity to take a shot. A large, black, hairy arm reached all the way into the room and toward Andy's bed, and I cut loose with the first round of buckshot, and then immediately with a second shot of deer slug. I wasn't messing around. I was intending on killing the intruder right then and there. And he jerked his arm back, taking out the entire window and glass flying all directions as I fired the third round. I must have hit him because he let out a wail that made me drop my shotgun and cover my ears. My wife called the police, and about 30 minutes later, I had a house full of officers questioning me and my wife while another group was taking blood and hair samples from Andy's room. They took all 3 of us to the state police headquarters and they grilled us separately for hours. I kept telling them that while they were wasting time holding us, they were letting some dude get away that was trying to kidnap our son. They offered a stock answer that I had just shot at someone and they were conducting their investigation. It was all standard procedure. A few hours passed before two men came into the interrogation room. One had a manner that oozed government official with his plain black suit and white shirt and black tie. A bigger dude was in a pair of jeans and a flannel shirt. The suit took a seat across the table from me and informed me that the blood and hair recovered from the scene belonged to a black bear, and pending any new evidence, we were otherwise free to go. That wasn't a bear, I protested. The bigger man hammered the table with his hands and threatened me with a night in jail if I didn't accept their findings. They had me over a barrel because of their authority. I collected my family and I headed home. I called some friends, including an old friend named Chuck, who had 6 of the best bear dogs in the state. They were there waiting for me when the state police dropped us off. I grabbed one of my buddy's rifles from his truck. Since our wonderful police force took possession of all my firearms for the time being, I'd have to file a claim to have them returned. Chuck turned loose his hounds, but they jumped back into his truck and they dove inside their kennels. And he tried to pull them out by the collar, but they would not budge. They wanted no part of tracking this so-called bear. The rest of us followed the blood trail for 25 minutes until it came to a creek. The day was turning dark, so we wrote off the rest of the search as a bust and we headed for the house. We all had a couple of beers and I recounted my story from the evening before, showing them Andy's bedroom covered with the intruder's dried blood, minus the hair which the police had collected and removed. One of the guys sounded off and suggested that it had been a Bigfoot. Shortly thereafter they left and Andy came out of my room looking upset. He told me that Jimmy's friends were mad and they were going to hurt us. How do you know that? I asked him. Andy pointed to his ears. I can hear them, he told me. They talk to me. From a child's lips, I thought. I was suddenly terrified for my family, and I drove us to my parents' place 50 miles away that night. I rented a moving truck the following day. I called my landlord and I tried to convince him that the house wasn't safe and that's why I was breaking the lease. We were loaded up and gone by noon. I found us a new home in Ohio, just north of the Ohio River. Living there, I could still keep my job at Home Depot. I still needed the income and the benefits. A few months passed without incident until one day Andy came out of the living room with his coat and shoes on. My new friend Steve wants to show me a special place and he needs me to meet him behind the garage, said Andy. I had my pistol and my spotlight and was out that door in a flash. I shined my light across every inch of the place and I didn't see anything, but the next morning I discovered 2 large tracks outside Andy's window. This time I took the family to my in-laws' house in East Tennessee. It wasn't the most comfortable place to live, but I knew that my father-in-law had enough firepower to defend my wife and child, and would no doubt do so with his dying breath. I found a new job, and we were looking for a home that spring when my wife saw Andy start waving at something beyond the tree line. Andy was excited that someone who looked like Jimmy wanted to play with him in the woods. We had just about convinced Andy over the past year to stop engaging with these creatures whose voices he kept hearing in his head. That evening, we were on the road again, our 4th move in just over a year. We found a home inside the city of Savannah, Georgia. We currently live in a suburb where there isn't even a rose bush planted on the block, let alone a tree. Now, I worry about my son and what could happen to him if we're not there to stop him venturing out someplace where he believes these beasts are waiting for him. I always dreamed of teaching my son to fish and hunt the same way my father taught me. But I can't see us camping or going into the wilderness until all of this gets resolved one way or another. I don't want my son to grow up a country boy trapped in a city. What do they want with him? Are they really talking to him through telepathy? I have so many questions, and I don't understand. I'm just a father on the edge. Wow, I have never, ever gotten a story anything like this. Nothing I've ever gotten approaches this. But if you guys have any suggestions, and I hope he hears this and reads the comments, give him some suggestions on what you think he should do. As far as the story goes, this was awesome, brother. I mean, this is one awesome story. But I know you have a problem on your hands, and I really, really hope you get it worked out. I'll be thinking about you. And keep us posted after this story is uploaded. If anything interesting happens, please keep in touch. I appreciate it. Thanks for the story, Aaron. Okay, here's an email from Robert. This is a good one, too. He writes, "Hello, Dixiecryptid. My name is Robert. I'm 37 years old and I live in southern Ohio. I've been here my whole life. I don't care if you share my name because that's not important. But what is important is letting people know that these encounters are real. I have 2 authentic experiences that I would love to share with you all. I always wanted to get my experiences out there. Everyone I've told so far thinks I'm crazy, but I don't care. It's the truth, and I know what happened as sure as water is wet. So let me tell you what happened. My first encounter was when I was 8 or 9 years old. I was living in Mount Orb, Ohio, about 40 miles east of Cincinnati. It's a small town where everyone knows everyone. Well, that's how it used to be. With everything growing the way it is, that old town feel is just a thing of the past, it seems. I was up late waiting for my mother to come home. I patiently waited at the bay window with my blanket wrapped around me and silently prayed that my mother would come on home. And all of a sudden I saw a light coming down the road from my right, heading west toward our driveway. My heart leaped with joy that I thought my mom was coming home. But the light slowly crawled toward the drive and then completely stopped. I thought that was weird, like, why is she stopping in the middle of the road? Maybe I was seeing things and it was just a street lamp, I thought. It was like the light heard my thoughts and then started heading west again toward the driveway. Once it reached the drive, it turned into the driveway and I thought my mother's car had a headlight out. But no sooner that crossed my mind, this light went from the end of our 50-yard driveway and it flew up to the bay window I was standing in faster than I've ever seen anything move. The light was so bright that I cannot explain it. It was brighter than the sun, yet there was no heat. I remember grabbing my head and closing my eyes, and I completely blacked out. And then I came to, and I don't know how much longer I had passed out, and I felt like I was put into my dresser drawer by my big brothers. I had no recollection of how I got here, and no other ideas made sense of where I was. So I screamed, and then I passed out again. And when I woke up back in my bed, with my covers over me, waking up to the most beautiful morning that I can ever remember. All my life, I have no idea what happened. All I know is that one of the 2 scariest moments of my life, and I really contemplated the idea of being hypnotized so that maybe I can see what really happened. I had a girlfriend and she said that maybe I shouldn't do that. There's a reason I don't remember and it would probably make things worse. Well, I'm not sure. All I know is I have so much anxiety writing this that I'm so locked in that it's my fingers are on the autopilot typing so fast. Now, I don't want to push religion on anyone, but it was either aliens or an angel sent to comfort me when I was longing for my mother. I'm not sure. Maybe they're the one and the same. All I know is that whenever you or anyone sees one of these orbs of light and you're by yourself, be careful and go the other way. Just don't get its attention. I think this orb that came to me are one and the same of the kind that killed all of those Russian hikers back in 1959. I think that area is called the Dyatlov Pass incident. Most mountains and deserts have high-frequency visits of these light orb things. My point is they are not to be messed with. Years later, I would have another odd experience when I was 35 years old. I lived in the village of New Richmond, Ohio. It's 20 miles east of Cincinnati. I was living in an old building that used to be an old doctor's office. I remember going there as a child when I moved into this place. It was like a sober living home, and many people lived here and came and went in their lives, doing the next right thing until they were on their feet and could move out. I was completely sober when these occurrences happened, and it really opened my eyes to the paranormal, especially the dark side of it. And about 3 a.m., I woke with sleep paralysis. Now, this has never happened to me until I moved into this house. I could not move, and I was hearing doorknobs rattle in the hallway right outside of my room. And I fought the fear, and I went back to sleep thinking, I'm a grown man. Whatever this is, it can't hurt me. I asked my roommate if he heard it the following day, and he said he didn't. A few weeks later, my old roommate had moved out, and an old buddy of mine moved in the room that I was in. And late that night, I woke again, and I was under a sleep paralysis once again. I heard a noise that sounded out of place, but it sounded human, like someone gasping or moaning. Finally, I sat up and I said, Dude, what are you doing? He looked at me like I was crazy, and he said it wasn't him, and he proceeded to laugh at me. I didn't find it funny that he didn't hear it, and I did. Something was not right here. A week or two went by, and I was in bed, and sleep paralysis hit me again. I had the worst feeling of dread come over me. Every night I woke, and it was around witching hour, between 2 and 3 a.m. This feeling wouldn't shake, and I couldn't move a muscle. The next thing that I heard is someone is running up to me with their feet pounding on the floor all the way up to my bed. Well, I was able to move once it seemed like whatever it was made it to my bed. I was really scared. My eyes were tearing up as I write this out. Anyway, a few weeks later, we were watching a horror movie and some guy made a pentagram on the floor with blood and he called on Satan. I tell these guys that we shouldn't be watching this because it opens up doors. And I was right. That night, sleep paralysis gripped me again, and that feeling of fear and dread gripped my soul. I fought to get my hands in a praying position, and I rolled to my left to face the window and get away from the dark hallway where it felt like it was coming from. I began to pray, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. And that was as far as I got when something yelled in my right ear, God can't save you. That was when the paralysis was lifted. I was so scared and I began to tear up. This was some dark stuff. Possession starts like that. They start small like noises and build up to overwhelm you and try to take your soul. It was the scariest thing I've ever been through. The last thing that happened was a week or so later. I woke between 2 and 3 a.m. once again. Had to use the bathroom. It was directly across the hall. I went to the bathroom, and when I was done, I stepped out into the hallway and closed the bathroom door. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and a black shadow figure, darker than dark, stepped up to me face to face. Once again, I could not move. I could feel the evil coming off of this thing. I guess my faith is strong because it stood there and stepped into the shower room. And then I ran and jumped in the bed like a little kid, and I pulled the blanket up over my head. It was a shadow entity. I think it was a demon. I asked around, and other people have seen it walking the hall at night. That was enough for me. I moved out of that place. It was the scariest thing that has ever happened to me, including what happened to me as a kid. This thing was a dark, malevolent being that haunted me. My father and my grandmother saw spirits. My family is Cherokee, and I got the gift, as they would call it. I call it a curse. I've always seen spirits in my peripheral vision, but never straight on like these 2 times. I've never seen another entity like this, but let me tell you that I'm almost 38 years old and I sleep with some kind of light on every night, even if it's just my cell phone lit up. It has given me PTSD because I know that there are things out in the dark that want our souls. Anyone that I have told these encounters to thinks that I'm nuts, but I'm telling the truth. Now y'all be safe out there and keep your faith in God. He's real and he'll protect you, and when you need him, thank you for sharing my experiences. Sincerely, Robert. Well, Robert, I feel bad for you that you're having to deal with these demons, man. But I'll tell you this, and like you, I'm not trying to bring religion into this, but if you belong to Christ, you're perfectly safe. They're not going to touch anything that belongs to Him. So stay close to the Lord, I would just try to live my life and do the best you could. I doubt you'll ever see Him again. I appreciate the story, and I'm glad you got it off your chest. Okay, here's an email from Jill. This is really interesting. She writes, my first Sasquatch encounter happened in 1969, the summer of my 11th birthday. A group of my girlfriends and I were discussing riding our bikes out to Hood Canal on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State. One of the families had property on the canal, and they had an old canvas tent permanently pitched there with a fire pit and a floating dock that you could swim off of. I really wanted to go on this adventure. It took me a whole week to talk my mom and dad into it. They were worried because there would not be any adults, just 5 young teens and 2 18-year-olds leading the trip, but they reluctantly agreed to let me go with the stipulation that I call them from the payphone at the store when we got there and each day after. Well, I eagerly agreed, and I started packing. The plan was to stay 4 days and 3 nights. We lived near Fauntleroy Ferry Dock in West Seattle, and we had to ride our bikes to Alki Point to get to the Bremerton Ferry that launched from the waterfront in downtown Seattle. Once we stepped off, we had to ride our bikes to the south end of Hood Canal, the site of the camp. The others had 10-speed bikes, while I was one of the few kids who only had a 3-speed. We were carrying our heavy backpacks, and I brought up the rear of the pack. We finally reached the family's property. It was cool and shady, and it was full of trees and undergrowth with a single trail going down the center of the property. That was where the canvas tent stood with the picnic table and a barbecue pit. The trail continued to the canals, which had a beach that was half rock and half sand, and we were so happy when we finally arrived, dripping in sweat and exhausted, and we threw our packs in the tent and we headed straight to go swimming in the salt water to cool off from the ride. This canal was full of oysters, which I really love eating oysters. I would dive down and bring up oysters and set them on the dock and dive down for more. I would use my T-shirt like a kangaroo's pouch, gathering up the oysters and swimming over to the shore where I would stockpile them in the shaded picnic area for our next meal. I have never eaten so many oysters in all my life. It was awesome. The last night of our trip, we gathered inside the tent. It was starting to get dark. All of us splintered off into groups and indulged in random pajama chatter. I was quietly lying on my side atop my sleeping bag with my ear to the ground, and I started to feel the vibration of heavy footsteps coming down the trail that went through the center of the property. Whatever it was coming toward us. I nudged my friend next to me, but to my amazement, she rolled over and went back to sleep. The others in the tent were passed out and snoring. It was the end result of a day full of outdoor activity. My heart started to race with excitement and nervousness, and I peered through the netting of the tent, and I saw 2 dark figures resembling a Sasquatch. One loomed over the other the way a parent would a small child. While the one I presumed was the mother stood outside our tent door, her baby went over to the picnic table and rummaged through the oyster shells, turning them over in its hands and discarding the remains onto the ground. Well, after a few minutes, the little one walked back over to the mother, and they both quietly turned and they left our campsite. I had actually seen a Bigfoot and its offspring, and even if my travel companions had snoozed through my encounter and no doubt would not believe me in the morning, I felt the experience was a tremendous gift. I was the first one up and out of my tent the next day. My father had taught me how to track, and I wanted to see if there were any footprints in the soil. I found 2 sets in the dirt, one large and one small. I followed them over to the road where the trail disappeared. There are some people who claim that Sasquatch have powers of telepathy. I don't know the lifespan of a Bigfoot, but I swear I've had instances where I've communicated with the mama Sasquatch I encountered over 50 years ago as an excitable 11-year-old on a camping trip with my friends. Oh, that's a cool story. Now, how could that happen? I hear about Bigfoot being telepathic, but I don't know how that works. I mean, do you just hear a voice in your head, or do you just have a feeling, or what is it? It's very interesting that these people seem to connect telepathically to the Sasquatch. Somebody explain that to me. I don't know how that works. Why would Sasquatch have the ability to do that? I think these are all rational questions anybody would have, but it's a real interesting concept. Man, I'm not sure I wouldn't like to experience that myself. But thank you very much for the story, Jill. This was an excellent story. It was a happy story, and I really appreciate it. Thank you. Here's a story from Kate, and she is in my state. She lives in my state, Mississippi. She writes, I'm from Dixie, Mississippi. My dad has always spoken about Bigfoot. My dad, along with my aunt and a few other family members, used to go sit on a long winding road in DeSoto National Forest near Camp Shelby that was barely wide enough for two cars to pass each other. On each side of the road was a strip of grass. Beyond that was dense woods. We would sit and listen until the early hours of the morning while my dad whistled and called and talked and tried to get a response from Bigfoot. The road must have been a mile or so long, but there was a curve that we couldn't see beyond from where we parked. The only street light on the whole road stood at a curve. I would sit and stare at that light, believing that at any minute it was going to happen. One was going to step out of the woods right under the dim glow of that old light and into our field of view. But that never happened. But something else did. One night, as usual, we were sitting and calling when everyone's attention was brought to the side of the road. Maybe it was a noise, or maybe it was a feeling. Everyone stopped talking and we all turned and looked. Every light shined to the same little rise. It wasn't big enough to be called a hill. It was only 3 feet tall. And above that, I saw what looked like a cone-shaped head with solid black hair on it sticking up over the top. As soon as I saw that, it occurred to me that I was the only one without a light, and fear struck me like a lightning bolt. I was only a child, I think I was 13, and stuck in the dark side of the road with our parked car between me and the place where the animal was. All the adults had all these lights and all of their attention on one spot. My dad wouldn't let me come around to the other side of the car with that creature there. I knew that without asking. He was a stern man, but I never had to be whooped by him. A simple look would always do it. In my mind, while everyone was looking at the show on the opposite side of the road, something was going to come out of the woods on our side, and I would be there alone and defenseless against it. I pressed the entire back side of my body against the back passenger door of the car, and I stared into the inky blackness of woods in front of me, and I silently pleaded that nothing would come get me. There was no way I was going to make a sound. My dad would have done me in if I'd have scared that creature off. I wish I could say what happened after that, because I don't remember. Clearly, we all got in the car and we left at some point. As far as I can remember, nothing came out of the woods on my side of the car, but I don't think I've ever felt such a cold, lonely fear before or since. We spent a lot of nights out on that road. Many times we heard whistles. A couple of times we heard footfalls. But we never had anything as groundbreaking as a full-on sighting. I called the BFRO when finding Bigfoot was popular, though, and they came out to do an investigation, and that was exciting. Years later, we were all at my big mama's for Sunday dinner and sitting around playing board games when someone brought up the subject of that road and all the times we'd go out there and sit and listen. It was then that my aunt told me about a man who died on that road. I was as much a true crime junkie as I was a Bigfoot addict, so this was a perfect story for me. She reminded me of the old wooden cross by where we used to sit at night. And the story goes that this man used to go out there and do the same thing that we used to do. Well, one night, he and a friend were sitting out there in their lawn chairs. He had a gun stuck in the chest pocket of his overalls. He knew that they didn't like guns, and suddenly they heard something and then they saw something. Nobody really knows what they saw, but it spooked the man. He tried to draw his pistol out of his pocket, and he accidentally shot himself in the chest. His friend called an ambulance. When they got there, everyone on the scene could hear something running back and forth inside the woodlines, screaming that horrible gut-wrenching scream. The ambulance driver wouldn't even get out. The man's friend had to help load him into the ambulance. The man died, and the cross was put there to memorialize him. Well, I was so intrigued by that story that I asked for more information on this road. I couldn't imagine anyone living there, but my aunt said that there was an old black lady who lived all the way down at the end of it, and that her windows were all covered up with aluminum foil. You couldn't prove it by me. I wouldn't drive a tank down that road. Of course, she's probably gone by now. At a recent family gathering, my fiancé and I were talking with my uncle about the road, and I brought up the story of the man who died there. I honestly believe that my uncle believes in Bigfoot, but no man around here is going to tell his niece or any woman that Bigfoot is real. I finished with the story, and right away he said, "Oh no, that was a setup. Bigfoot is not real." What? I couldn't believe what he said. And then he went on to say that his friends killed that man and cooked up a Bigfoot story to cover it up. I don't know which version of the story is more believable. I believe in Bigfoot, and I always will. But there are some pretty rough characters in the backwoods around here who might have found Bigfoot to be a convenient scapegoat for their own misdeeds. Oh my goodness, what a great story. Kate, it's funny, I don't know. Yes, we do have rough characters that live back in these woods, especially in the Delta. Well, up in the hills too, there's just some, it's it's hard to describe. There are some rough people who live in this state, and I can see somebody making up a Bigfoot story to cover up a crime. That makes perfect sense, but here's the thing. This woman never saw a Bigfoot. This is not really a Bigfoot story, but I appreciate you all so much for sending me such a variety of stories. I get to get a little piece of everyone's imagination, everyone's memories. A lot of this woman is talking about stuff that happened years ago, and these are memories that stick with her. And the way you all describe them is just so great, and I just love the way you write. More than being able to put this up on a podcast, I love reading them. I just love reading old memories and stories people have. And sometimes I can identify, like with this woman, her and her family sitting out on that road, waiting for Bigfoot to come out on the road. Now, my family would have never done that, but we used to go down, we'd go down to old ponds, late in the afternoon in the summer. We'd sit in that hot summer sun, or in the evening when the sun would start to go down. And into the night, we would just keep fishing. We'd fish off the bank sometimes. Sometimes we'd get in a boat and paddle around a pond. Sometimes we'd put in a river and we'd fish till way after dark. I just remember all those times, and hearing you guys retell these stories brings back great memories for me. And I'd love to sit around a campfire, or I don't know, at a bar or across the table from some of y'all and just reminisce about some of the things we used to do in this part of the country that were so fun for us kids. But anyway, Kate, thank you for this story. I loved it. I really appreciate you. Thank you all for joining me on this podcast. I know I have been gone for a little while. I could explain it, but it's kind of boring. But you know what? I have a lot of work right now, and I do this podcast. I don't have to do this podcast. And I've been doing it straight for almost 5 years now. And I just took a break from the podcast. That's what I did. But today I got up and I was raring to get back. And so I think I've had a good vacation from the podcast. and I'm just going to keep cranking them out like I always have, 2 or 3 a week, hopefully. And y'all stay cool. It's going to be hot this week. Supposed to be 100 degrees here today. I'm sitting here with my air conditioner off, so you can't hear it in this mic. So I'm going to end this podcast so I can turn my sweet air back on. All right, you guys have a good week, and we'll see you on the next one. Thanks.